Okay, we're in 18a, Yud Chesamud Beis. So Friday we had quite a mind bender, but reaching the conclusion we came as follows. This is the conclusion that Gemara is about to reject. The Mishnah had stated in explaining the double expression Amen. After the Kohen administers the vow to the Sotah, and she says, as the verse requires, she says Amen, Amen, which means I affirm, the double expression. And the Mishnah used that as a way to tell us that the husband can make her affirm more than just what's at stake. Meaning what's at stake here is, did she or did she not misbehave with this person that he's suspecting her about? That's the issue at hand. But he can add other stuff. You know, Rabbi Meir's opinion is you can go to the future, vow that you'll never misbehave, or a vow that we didn't misbehave when we were engaged. All these kinds of double expressions. And one of the double expressions the Gemara indicate, the Mishnah said, is that a woman who is currently married to her brother-in-law, because her first husband died, right? She's married to her brother-in-law, sounds weird. Her first husband died childless. So as per Torah's law, the marriage to her first husband, deceased first husband, rolls over into the new, or it continues into the marriage with the new brother, with the new husband B, brother B. Yavam. And this marriage is extended right in. So, and now during this second marriage, right, her marriage to the brother, she becomes a Sotah. He warns her against secluding herself with a certain guy, and she does seclude herself, and she's taken to the temple, the whole thing. And now she's taking a vow that she didn't, affirming that she did not misbehave with this guy that he is suspecting. So the Mishnah said that he could include in that vow that she didn't misbehave during the time between the first husband's death and her, when she's waiting, between the first husband's death and her consummating the marriage of the second brother. This is called Shemeres Yavam. That time frame is at least 3 months, but it could be longer depending on the circumstances, but it's at least 3 months by Torah law, just in case she gets pregnant. Sorry? It's called the Shavua Gilgal. Shavua de Gilgal is in general, Shavua de Gilgal just means a vow by incarnation. Meaning we add layers to the vow. Since you're vowing anyway, you might as well throw other things into the mix there too. Okay, so that's what the Gemara said. Now, the Mishnah also said, right, so the Mishnah said you can include in the vow that she didn't misbehave during the time when she was waiting between after her first husband died and she consummated the marriage with the second brother. She can vow that she didn't misbehave then too. Or he can throw that into the vow too. The Mishnah also said that as a matter of principle, the only thing that he can include in the vow are relationships that would make it forbidden for him to be with her. So if a husband and wife are married and she is unfaithful, theoretically, just any marriage, if a wife is unfaithful, theoretically, husband is now forbidden to be with her. They have to divorce. So that's the kind of vow that can be thrown into the mix here. Which is why the Mishnah said that if she's taking a vow now that she didn't misbehave during marriage, or she didn't misbehave with this guy about which you're suspecting me, she can also add, or they can also add into the vow that you didn't misbehave with any guy. Because even if she didn't misbehave with this person, but she misbehaved with someone else, that would also invalidate their relationship. So any relationship that would invalidate or make it forbidden for him to be with her, that's the kind of relationship that can be, that's the kind of cheating, questioning that can be put into the vow. That's what the Mishnah said. So now combining these two, sorry, is that clear? Yeah.
Now what would happen if she was raped during that?
So rape is a different story. Rape is a different story. Rape has its own set of laws. But, so let's just clarify this even more. So for example, he can't say to her, let's also add into the vow that you're a virgin at the time of our marriage and that you'd never misbehaved before. He can't do that. Because even if she did misbehave before she was married, that would not invalidate their marriage. It wouldn't make him forbidden to be with her. So he can't put that into the vow. Only such intimacy that she would have had that would render their relationship forbidden, that's the only kind of things they can put into the vow. That's the case that we just said earlier, that this woman whose first husband died and now she's waiting to marry the second one. And then she marries the second one, and then she becomes a Sotah. He wants to add to the vow that she didn't misbehave during the time when she was waiting. That would mean if she did misbehave during the time when she was waiting, it would invalidate their relationship.
Yeah, so that would.
Because otherwise it can't be put into the vow. This is Rabbi Nuna's argument that we did on Friday.
You cannot.
Otherwise, it would not be put into the vow. The very fact that when he makes her vow in the second marriage, the very fact that he's allowed to add to the mix, I want you to affirm that you didn't misbehave when you were waiting to marry me, means that had she misbehaved during that time, it would have made their relationship invalid. Because the Mishnah concluded by saying that only such relationship, only such intimacies that would render their relationship invalid, those are the only intimacies that are allowed to be included in the vow.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing.
Oh.
That's just an opinion. It's an opinion which, because she's not really married to the second brother, because she didn't consummate yet, and she's not married to the other brother, because the other brother's dead. So it's a bit of a, it's a chiddush, it's a bit of a legal novelty to say that during this time period, her intimacy with another guy would render her marriage to the second brother invalid, or would render the relationship with the second brother as forbidden, because she's not technically married to him. She's technically a single woman. She's a single woman waiting to marry. So the right. So Rabbi Nuna is arguing the extension of the first marriage is so strong that even though she didn't consummate with the second marriage, intimacy at this point would still render their relationship forbidden. That's right.
It's already a marriage.
That's right. That's what Rabbi Nuna is arguing. At the first, but the fact that the Torah extends the first marriage from the deceased brother into the second one is so strong that even though she didn't consummate the marriage with the second brother, she's still considered somewhat married to him by extension of the first brother's death. And therefore, if she misbehaved now, it would render the relationship forbidden. And thus, later on, if he's not sure about what happened, he can include it in the vow. Is that clear?
What if he wasn't sure of something? His brother dies, and she's supposed to go to him.
He's unsure about what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say he goes through with the marriage.
He's not sure yet.
That's right.
Fine.
Oh, about whether or not he wants to marry her.
Yeah.
So
she can go through somebody else.
Not yet.
There's a waiting period.
There's a certain waiting period, and at some point, actually,
On her,
but at some point they forced the brother. They forced them at some point. Let's say if he's holding out and making her suffer,
yeah. So
at some point they'll force him make a decision, either marry her or do chalitza, the separation. At one point, the bezdin will step in and say, I can't remember when exactly that date is, but there's a time when he'll
force him to voluntarily choose.
Force him to choose either marry, and if you don't want to, do this process called chalitza and let's move on with life. Yeah. You can't have her stuck like this for. It's an aguna. That's like an aguna. It's like you're.
They're the same shit or get up.
Something like that, yeah. Pull the trigger already, one way or the other. Okay, so this is the Rabbi Nuna's argument, deducing from our Mishnah, from the fact that the waiting period is also included in the vow, means that had she been unfaithful during the waiting period, it would have made the relationship with the second brother forbidden. That's what Rabbi Nuna's argument is.
If they rule in that Rabbi Nuna's way.
Hamnuna, yeah. Hamnuna.
Yeah. Then they would have to divorce at that point. If let's say they were married.
If
he brought a soda after they were consummated.
Or let's say brought witnesses. Let's say they're married, right? To the second brother. She's married to the second brother. witnesses arrived that say that during the time period when she was waiting to get married to him because the first brother was deceased, they witnessed that she was intimate.
It's undisputed that she gave that testimony that she was not faithful.
That's right. And
During that waiting
that's right.
period.
Even if she wasn't a Sotah, if witnesses arrived and says that she was intimate, she cheated during a time period, then they have to divorce.
They have to divorce.
That's right, according to Rabbi's opinion.
Does that invalidate the children's status because they were technically never?
No, that doesn't, because they are married. It's just that she's forbidden to live with him.
Because if you go retroactive,
Okay, that's a good question. I don't know if there's retroactive, but maybe the next discussion will help us. But I don't know for sure if there's retroactive.
It's validated from that point.
Let's put this Yavam aside. A regular case in which husband and wife are married and they have children, and then the woman is unfaithful, and therefore they divorce. It doesn't invalidate the marriage retroactively.
No, that's.
But in this case, we're finding out that she was unfaithful way long ago.
Been able to marry at that point, if it were known at that point.
Okay.
That's a little different.
I don't know that it invalidates the children, but let's see, maybe. Well, let's see the next Gemara's few lines. It might. We'll see in a second what might happen here. All right, let's see. That is a good question, though.
I don't think a lot of the great rabbis at that time believed in that principle of, I think it's called retroactive designation.
There is such
a big dispute, right?
But there is such an idea of retroactively finding out that the marriage was invalid and then the children, the status changed. That happens. That happens quite a bit. Even till today, it happens.
Yeah.
Today it doesn't really happen with regard to other with regard to like it only really happens now with regard to kohen, the status of the children. If the marriage was one that a kohen can't, a relationship that a kohen is not supposed to have, that might cause it. Okay, let's see. How many Maravas? So we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines under the Mishnah. First line of the word is Ima, and then we say Amri b'Marava. In the West, they would say.
This is 18b, right?
18b. In the West, they would say. So of course, what's the West? Israel, because we are in Babylonia. So they would refer to Israel as the West. Yeah. So Amri b'Marava, they would say in the West. Leis helchas hakarav hamnuna. The law does not follow Rav Hamnuna. Meaning, Rav Hamnuna, who argued that a woman who is waiting to marry the second husband in the morning, a woman waiting to marry the second husband, Rav Hamnuna argued that if she was unfaithful during that time, after her first husband died before she consummated with the second marriage, with the second brother, if she was unfaithful during that time, Rav Hamnuna argued that would make it forbidden for her to be with the second brother. In Israel, they would reject that thesis, rejected that argument. So if that's the case, they would have to explain our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that a Sotah woman of a second brother is allowed to include in the vow the fact that she wasn't unfaithful during the time of the waiting period. Right? That's what our Mishnah said. Mm-hmm. And the including an unfaithful relationship in a vow is only if that unfaithful relationship would render him forbidden to be with her. So if in the West they're saying that her unfaithfulness in the waiting period does not render their relationship forbidden, then why is it included in the vow? Clear? So says the Gemara, Hamani, because in the West they would say that our Mishnah follows one specific opinion, whereas the other sages reject that opinion. This opinion is Rabbi Akiva. So there's different, we have to think of different time periods, right? There's the Mishnah, there's Rav Hamnuna, and then there's us in the Gemara later, quoting Rav Hamnuna, who's arguing about the Mishnah. So Rav Hamnuna argues that our Mishnah is a universally applied law, and therefore universally any woman who was unfaithful during the waiting period between deceased husband A and marriage consummation to husband B, she was unfaithful, renders the relationship forbidden. That's what Rav Hamnuna argued. But now us, the Gemara, is saying that in the West, they would say that this Mishnah up here is not universal. It's only one opinion, Rabbi Akiva. And everybody else rejects Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So what did Rabbi Akiva say that would make the people in Israel assume that this statement is only Rabbi Akiva? Following? Okay, so let's see what Rabbi Akiva said.
Yeah, because the Mishnah
It doesn't state a name. So we have to, that's right. So you have to find, that's right. The Mishnah doesn't say who's speaking here.
Where did that come from?
So we have to find some other discussion between Rabbi Akiva and the sages and apply that discussion to our Mishnah. Namely, the Amar Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion, Ein Kiddushin Toifsin L'chayve Lav. Let's explain what this means. There are some times when the Torah forbids a relationship, and because the Torah forbids a relationship, if these two people went ahead and got married, he gave her a ring in the presence of witnesses and did the whole business, the marriage never happened, even though they did the whole ceremony, because Torah says this relationship is invalid. Simple example, incest. Incest. If a brother hands a ring to his sister in the presence of witnesses with the whole thing, by Torah law, that it was a void, empty activity, has no legal significance. So they aren't married because their relationship to begin with is forbidden by Torah law. But then there are other types of prohibitions in which Torah says you cannot marry, but if they went ahead and did, the marriage is a valid marriage. So there's such examples. So there's, like a kohen was someone not supposed to marry.
Right.
If a kohen went ahead and married someone not supposed to marry, so even though he's not supposed to marry her, but if he gave her a ring to the whole thing, the marriage is a legally binding marriage, even though they weren't supposed to do it.
Did he void his kahuna?
Sorry. So he relinquishes his status as a kohen maybe, but the marriage still is a marriage. So there are three levels. There are three levels of prohibited marriage. One is a violation of a positive command, right? So say the Torah says a kohen should only marry a single woman, let's just say. I think there's actually a prohibition there too, but let's just say that that's what it is. I can't remember where it's in actual marriage, just an assay. There's Amono Grusha Lesikach, that's for Kohen Gadol. I think this is it. I think the Kohen. I'm trying to remember. No, Isha's. So Isha Zaina Lesikach, that's a prohibition. He shouldn't marry a Zaina. But then there is a positive command also. There are certain times when the prohibition is the extension of a positive command, meaning thou shalt marry such and such. And by inference, there's a prohibition not to marry anybody else. Right? So marrying somebody you're not supposed to would be a violation not of a negative command, but a positive command.
It's kind of like a word line.
That's one level. Yeah, the inference.
Yeah. Balaam's curse is blessing.
Remind me?
Balaam's cursing.
Yeah.
That one of the is that one of them? When Balaam's curse brought blessings? No. I'm thinking of I think in this class actually. No, it was in this class, sorry.
Well, we had this idea of the inference.
Where there's a negative command.
Yeah, here,
Yeah,
where we told her that if you didn't misbehave, you won't be cursed.
Yeah.
So that's a positive description,
Right.
which means if you did misbehave, you are cursed.
Right.
Right. Okay. So similarly, yeah, but similarly with the commandments. So that's one level commandment in which the prohibition is by inference of a positive command. Then there is a negative command. High priest shall not marry a widow or divorcee. It's a prohibition.
Yeah.
Then there is prohibitions that if you violate this prohibition, you'd be liable for excision. It's a higher level. So incest would be a prohibition of excision. If God forbid a brother and a sister are intimate, they're liable for excision. So at that level, at the level of prohibition, where if someone violated this prohibition, this relationship, there would be excision, that everybody agrees such a marriage, marrying someone like that would be null and void. It would be a empty activity.
What's excision again?
Meaning the death by the hands of heaven, and God cuts off the person's soul too. So it's death of the soul and death of the body.
Death by the hands of heaven?
Yeah, excision. But there are other types of death by the hand of heaven that aren't excision. Meaning the person dies, but his soul doesn't get cut off. This is a case where his body and soul get cut off. It's the highest level punishment that Torah has to offer.
Wow.
Yeah. Even the soul gets cut off. It doesn't get the world to come. It's a very serious situation. Yes.
the
Yeah.
world to come.
So that person's, in Rambam's words, he dies like an animal in which his body disintegrates and his consciousness is no longer, it's gone, it's over.
Like that.
Just like that. It's just pretty heavy.
That's
Okay.
perfect.
Yeah, so that's the highest level. So at the level of, so if the person, let's say incest, in which the relationship, Torah says if a person did this relationship, God forbid, it's excision. So with that kind of relationship, marriage does not happen. And the question is, if the person is in violation of a negative commandment, thou shalt not marry so-and-so, say the kohen or the high priest, which is not meant to marry a divorcee or widow, if they did go ahead and get married, is that marriage a null and void activity, or is it an actual marriage?
Talking about me?
Now you were taken care of already, God, thank God. Right, Zalman Kaplan took care of you there, Rabbi Zalman. Right, they wrote a whole, someone wrote up a whole essay on Rabbi Shachat, I think, right? Yeah, you wrote a tshuva on your case, yeah. But yeah, that we don't have to get into the details of that now. But yes,
Is that another epic Alan Nash story?
the most epic Alan Nash story.
More than the pharmacy shootout?
It's tight. I don't know. It's tight.
Yeah, that's who he's talking to.
I've known you for this long, I haven't heard any of them. Okay.
Anyway, the question is, if the relationship is a violation of a law, say a high priest is not allowed to marry a widow or divorcee, that's a violation of prohibition. If you went ahead and married her, is that marriage a null and void activity, or is it a legally binding activity, even though it's in violation of a command? This is the question. So most scholars are of the opinion that the marriage does happen. He just loses his status as a high priest, but the marriage still happens.
High priest or any priest?
Or any priest. Yeah, right. A regular priest also, but there's a difference between a high priest and a regular priest.
Kohen Hedio.
Yeah, there's different relationships. But the point is, if it's a violation, not of a prohibition of excision, it's just a violation of a negative command. Is that marriage, literally, does that marriage hold? That's the language. Kedushin Tovsin. Does the marriage hold? Does the marriage have any legal validity? Or is that marriage null and void because you're in violation? Rabbi Akiva is of the view that here's the language. Ein Kedushin Tovsin, marriage does not hold, when those who are liable for a negative command, even if it's not of excision. And he considers this as much as an incestuous relationship, because Torah says you can't have it. So now, therefore, says the Gemara like this. This is what the Gemara is deducing. This is what they're deducing in the West.
And where did that come from?
This is a universal dispute between Rabbi Akiva and the sages elsewhere in the Masechta Yavamis and other places. Many different places. This dispute. Here the Gemara references.
That's a very strict standard.
Yes, Rabbi Akiva is a very high standard. Also for mamzer, for someone who's an invalid, illegitimate child, Rabbi Akiva also has a high standard. So his opinion is not accepted.
Okay.
Right? But his opinion is like this: if you're in violation of a negative command, right, then that marriage doesn't hold, and it's considered exactly like a regular incestuous relationship. So therefore, the Gemara, this is how Rashi explains it. Therefore, what the Gemara is telling us is like this: a woman whose husband died childless, and now she's waiting to marry the second brother, right?
Mhm.
The Torah says, "You woman shall not marry anyone else." So you're in violation of a prohibition. Which means, according to Rabbi Akiva, if she were to be intimate with somebody else, it's just like an incestuous relationship. And because he puts it on such a high level, therefore, he extends, the same thing would be, this is what they're arguing in the West, this is what they're arguing in Israel. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva would say that because it's such a lofty prohibition, therefore, if she was unfaithful, that would render the next marriage forbidden. Because he's treating it as if it's a married woman who's unfaithful. Because he's taking prohibitions and putting it at the level of excision.
But there's no outright prohibition. It's almost like a circular reasoning.
Which is why there is an outright prohibition. Torah says,
These cases,
no, there is an
where I see
outright,
it's
there
clearly
is an
stated.
outright prohibition. There's not just a positive command, there's actually an outright prohibition. The verse says, Rashi quotes the verse, this woman, this widow shall not marry any foreign man. So it's an actual prohibition, not just a command. There's a command to marry the brother, but there's also a prohibition against marrying somebody else, which means this relationship, if she was unfaithful, is a prohibition, is a violation of prohibition. And Rabbi Akiva took the violation of prohibition and made it as high as incest. And if it's made it as high as erva, made it as high as those who are liable for excision. If that's the case, he's making this relationship, which is only a violation of the command, and put it at the level of someone who's married even. And thus, such a relationship, such an infidelity would render the marriage to the next brother as forbidden. And if you could argue against this, is why Rabbi Menuna rejects this explanation. But this is what they said in the West. This is what they said in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, it's true that our Mishnah is of the opinion that if she were unfaithful during this waiting time period, she would be forbidden to be with the next husband, with the brother. But that is only according to Akiva, who places the liability of prohibition at a very high level. But everybody else says it's a violation, but it's not
Right.
it's not cheating. She's not married yet. She's not married yet. That's what everybody else would say. And that's according to everybody else, you could not include in the vow that you are unfaithful during the waiting period. Only Rabbi Akiva would allow you to include that in the vow because he places that unfaithfulness at a very lofty level. But everybody else would say it's a violation, but she's not married yet, so it's not the worst thing. And if we cannot include it in the vow. Clear?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you want to say, Mayor?
I was gonna say so it's like she's marrying without yibum, then it's like she's like marrying without a get, or and it's like
If she's married without chalitza, you mean?
yeah, without chalita, yeah.
Then it's like she's married without a get. Not exactly, because her first husband's dead. How strong do you say this prohibition is, where God says don't marry anybody else?
Right.
Is that because you're still married to the first guy who's dead already? Or is it just a prohibition? But it's not like she's a married woman. She's not a married woman.
Right.
That's like the way we're thinking about it.
Right.
But if Akiva says if it's a prohibition, no, it's like she's a married woman. And everybody else says it's a prohibition, but it's not like she's a married woman.
Right.
What's
Right.
the verse or the language that Rabbi Akiva is using that says she's not allowed to be with any other? You said it.
This woman who is the wife of the deceased husband should not be to another man.
That's the verse.
That's the verse, correctly. So
That's the prohibition
that's right.
he violated, that he's bringing to a
That he's
higher
bringing
standard.
because he puts all prohibitions to a higher standard.
I didn't.
That's it.
That's what I needed.
So she's married to one man who died,
Yeah.
and she can't be with any other man until.
Either she marries the brother,
All the brothers would be.
one of them.
Yeah,
Or one.
Chalitza,
As long as she does chalitza from one of them.
you shouldn't be with anyone else unless.
And if she does, then it's like the
ends up
highest
with one of
one.
them, then that's the problem.
If she ends up with one of
The brothers. Yeah.
then she's married. I mean, if she was unfaithful before.
Unfaithful.
So according to Akiva, that'd be a problem. Everybody else would say she wasn't married then. It was a prohibition, but she wasn't married. It wasn't like it's not like an erva. It's not like a
But it's interesting that.
she violated a command, but she didn't cheat on anybody.
Right.
Whereas Akiva says no, if it's a violation of a command, it's like you're cheating on somebody.
Right.
That's the way it is. That's the
interesting
dispute
that
here.
The Mishnah doesn't include his name. It's not the Mishnah will say, well, Rabbi Shimon.
Which is maybe this is why Rabbi Menuna rejects this way of thinking. Rabbi Menuna says, look, the
But it's
Mishnah,
ultimately rejected, right?
the Gemara, it seems like the halacha follows
Follows
the West, people there to Israel. That's what it seems like. Okay, so stop over here. And Mr. Hashem, tomorrow we have more on this.
Oh, did we
Sorry?
actually find I have two types of avoidable marriages, one where it's a violation of a negative commandment, or the one where karet is the punishment.
Excision, yeah.
The one with the violation of a positive commandment.
Yes, I don't think anybody argues that would be considered.
No, I know, but there was no example of that.
I'm trying to remember what it was. There is. I remember learning from Rambam. Rambam tells us certain relationships are only forbidden by extension of a positive command. I'm trying to remember which ones they are.
I thought I may have missed it.
No. I'm trying to remember what they are because a kohen. I think it's the kohen.
The Cohen should marry
A kohen should marry.
A virgin. or something?
No, it's not. She has to marry. No, it says isha zona lo yisikachu. He can't take a zona. A woman who's qualified as
Street
From-
worker.
yeah, and then which has a certain classification, and then there is the command, right? But is that written in a positive commandment or in a negative? No, but how is it written? Is it written that
Oh, how's it
he
written?
should marry someone who's never been married, or is it written he shall not marry? Someone who's divorcing. or is it written as a positive command? I think it's written as a negative. I think you're right, but there are other forbidden will. Right, but I'm trying. You know what? Let's look it up. Let me look it up.
Wow, it's very heavy.
Hold on 1 second. I'll look it up.
Okay, we'll wait till it's free.
Sorry, what do you want to ask?
About excision. So it's not possible for somebody to do tshuva if they've been guilty of excision.
A person can always do tshuva, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's a positive command. Yeah. The pasuk says, they shall not take a woman. Sorry, I just realized I was muted in the second half of the thing. Okay, so just for the camera, I just realized I was muted before. A kohen marrying a divorcee is a prohibitive command, and I have to look up to find where there's the relationship that's forbidden only by positive. It's in Parshas Emor, right? Isn't that where it is? It's Parshas Emor. Yeah. So in Leviticus 21, 20, those verses. All right. So you know exactly where it is. It is in, Leviticus 21. It's in that, I'm pretty sure it's Parshas Emor. Okay, have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow, God willing.
Is that chapter 21?
Yeah, chapter 21. It's the beginning of Parshas Emor. You know, if you probably read through Emor, you'll probably find where's the positive command there.
Okay.
Just go through the beginning of Emor.